Hey everybody, Eternal Fire here, bringing you a video guide on the Marksman Hunter and the pre-patch to the Legion expansion 7.0.3. Today we're going to be taking a look at the talent trees, the build you want to use for your Marksman Hunter, and we're also going to be going in pretty in-depth about the rotation, as it is pretty complicated, and you need to understand how your class rotation needs to work. With that said, let's go to the talent tree. First, we're going to talk about Lone Wolf. Increases your damage by 18%, but you can no longer use Call Pet. So you won't have a pet, but you automatically do more damage. This in this tier is the best ability that you want to use. Lock and Load is a passive ability. Your ranged auto attacks have an 8% chance to trigger Lock and Load, causing your next two aim shots to cost no focus and be instant. This is the best of ability also in this tier. The only other one you might want to consider is something you'd use while doing something solo or questing. Fires a black arrow at the target, dealing shadow damage over 8 seconds and summoning a dark minion to taunt it for the duration. When you kill an enemy, the remaining cooldown on black arrow will reset. So if you're using Lone Wolf and you're questing alone, that could prove beneficial. Dropping down to the next tier, we have Post Haste, which is the best mobility talent in the tier here. It's a passive. Disengage also frees you from all movement and pairing effects and increases your movement speed by 60% for 8 seconds. So it looks something like this. You jump backwards and then you have an increased speed buff right there for 8 seconds. It's very nice to use, and disengage is only on a 20-second cooldown, so you can use it often. Far Strider is a passive ability. Your ability critical strikes have a 10% chance to reset the remaining cooldown on disengage. Dash increases the duration of aspect of the cheetah by 3 seconds, which is really terrible. Out of the three here, Post Haste definitely trumps the others. In the next tier, we have Explosive Shot and Sentinel and Patient Sniper. Of the three, Explosive Shot is very clunky. Sentinel pales in comparison to Patient Sniper. Patient Sniper is a passive ability. Gain the patience of a veteran sniper, increasing your maximum focus by 30 and causing vulnerable to increase your marked shot and aim shot damage by 150%, but only lasts for 6 seconds and no longer stacks. Vulnerable is a debuff that you will be placing on your target quite frequently, and basically all of your high damage dealing abilities are going to be based around keeping vulnerable up on your target at all times. We're going to talk about that in much more detail later. Binding Shot fires a magical projectile, tethering the enemy and any other enemies within 5 yards for 10 seconds, stunning them for 5 seconds if they move more than 5 yards from the arrow. So basically what happens is if you put it down, if any enemies are around that arrow in the range and they try to run away, it'll stun them before they get away, and they'll be stunned for 5 seconds. Werven Sting is more of a PvP ability. You won't really be using it in PvE. And Camouflage, you and your pet blend into the surrounding and gain stealth for 1 minute. While camouflaged, you will heal for 2% every 1 second. I don't really think this is going to prove beneficial in many PvE settings, but it's probably going to be a lot of fun getting around certain things when you're doing stuff solo or questing. A Murder of Crows and Volley pale in comparison to Barrage. Barrage costs 60 focus. It rapidly fires a spray of shots for 2.8 seconds, dealing physical damage to the target and an average of blank physical damage to each other enemy in front of you, usable while moving. This is probably one of your best damage dealing abilities, and you're going to be using it on cooldown. Now, of the last tier, your best ability is Sidewinders. It replaces Arcane Shot and Multi-Shot. Launches Sidewinders that travel toward the target, weaving back and forth and dealing nature damage to each target they hit. Cannot hit the same target twice. Also applies vulnerable to all targets hit. So speaking of vulnerable, let's look at the Spellbook. We have two abilities that apply the vulnerable debuff to your target. One is Marked Shot. Rapidly fires shots at all targets in your Hunter's Mark, dealing physical damage and making them vulnerable for 6 seconds. The vulnerable debuff, damage taken from Marked Shot and Aim Shot increased by 150% last 6 seconds and stacks up to 1 time. And it would stack up to 3 times if you didn't take Patient Sniper, but it's still the best ability, most powerful. So that is your vulnerable that you want to keep up. So just keep in mind that vulnerable is applied by Marked Shot and Sidewinders. Let's look at some of the passive abilities, and keep in mind also that when you read Arcane Shot or Multi-Shot, they really mean Sidewinders because that replaces both. Bombardment, your critical strikes with Multi-Shot increase Multi-Shot damage by 60% for 5 seconds. Hunter's Mark, your auto shots have a chance to cause your next Arcane Shot or Multi-Shot to apply Hunter's Mark. Hunter's Mark activates Marked Shot. Again, your ability that targets or triggers vulnerable. Hunting Party. After you kill a target, the remaining cooldown on Exhilaration is reduced by 30. Exhilaration is a new ability we have that's built into the Hunter class. Heals you for 50% of your maximum health, which is a really nice heal on a 2-minute cooldown. Mastery, Sniper Training. Range of all your ranged abilities is increased by 11%, and damage of all your focus spending abilities increased by 47%, making Mastery pretty valuable. Before we go into the DPS rotation, you have 1 DPS cooldown as a Hunter. True Shot increases haste by 40% and causes Arcane Shot and Multi-Shot to always apply Hunter's Mark, lasts 15 seconds. So when you start your DPS rotation, you're going to use True Shot immediately. Then you're going to follow it up with a Barrage. Then you're going to use Sidewinders, which has 2 charges, followed up with 2 aim shots. Then you're going to use your Mark Shot, followed up with an aim shot. And then you're going to use another Sidewinders, and then your aim shot twice, and then Mark Shot. And there's kind of a rotation here. You'll see this debuff vulnerable up here by the target. Basically what you're doing is you're using Sidewinders. If you have 2 cooldowns, you'll always use it. You never want to get Sidewinders to have 2 charges available. You only want it to have 1 available. So if you have 2 charges of Sidewinder, you're going to use that automatically. So your Barrage, and then Sidewinders, which puts up vulnerable. Then you use 2 aim shots while vulnerable is up. And then one thing, remember the passive ability marking targets. Your auto attacks have a chance to put up marking target. So you'd use your Sidewinders to activate it, and then Mark Shot is now available. But you don't want to use both of these abilities apply vulnerable, so you don't want to use that right away after Sidewinders. You want to get an aim shot in first. Then you're going to use your Mark Shot, which then again applies vulnerable. Get some aim shots in, and at that point you're going to want to wait for another marking targets to come up. You're going to use that and then aim shot. So basically what you're never going to want to do is Sidewinders followed immediately by Mark Shot. You also want to try to avoid using all your Sidewinders, using all your charges, and having it be on cooldown, because if marking targets comes up, you're going to lose out on a lot of DPS waiting for that Sidewinders to come back up. You're basically going to always be using aim shot when you have vulnerability up. So it's kind of a lot to take in at first, but when you play with it for a little while, it starts to make sense and it starts to flow a little bit. The nice thing about this spec is that your AoE rotation is built into your single target rotation. So you're basically just going to pick your primary target and just do your normal single target rotation, and that's going to be your AoE. So you're going to do your Barrage on cooldown, you're going to use Sidewinders, you're going to use aim shot twice, then you're going to use Mark Shot to keep up the vulnerable debuff, use aim shot while that's available, and then you're going to wait for Sidewinders to proc, and once it procs, you're going to use that, and then you're going to use your aim shots again, followed up with your Mark Shots. I know this is kind of redundant, but it's kind of hard to take in. There's a lot of cooldowns that are involved with this rotation, a lot of things you have to be watching for. This is definitely not a spec where you just want to be spamming your buttons. You have to be very, knowledgeable on where you're at. Is vulnerable up? Should I use Sidewinder? No, vulnerable's up. I'm going to keep using aim shot. So then, okay, vulnerable's down. Now I can use my, Mark Shot. That puts your vulnerable back up. You can use more aim shot until it goes down. Then you use your Sidewinders again once the marking targets is up. Again, it's a lot to take in, but it's it's a very fun class. It does a lot of damage when you use that cooldown rotation correctly. So that's pretty much it for the Marksman Hunter's guide. We went over the talents, the build, the rotation. If you guys have any questions, please feel free to leave me a comment. If you like the video, leave me a like and subscribe to my channel. Thank you guys.